Welcome to the OK Not OK podcast. I am Dr. OK, and today is our OK question of the week, so why don't we just get right to it with the SportsZu. Doc, we finally got to see Kevin Owens speak to Sami Zayn, and I think we're both interested in that, so why was KO right this week? Well, SportsZu, I'm glad you're finally learning that KO is always right, so let's get right to what he had to say to your boy Sami Zayn on Monday Night Raw. So he said, "I know you'll win the Royal Rumble. You know why? Because I've got your back. I do. And I know I'm gonna walk out of the Royal Rumble as the WWE Champion because just like you had Roman's back, you've got my back, right? I mean, I just know it, dude. You're my best friend. And as my brother, if I need you, I know you'll be there." Wow, okay. Very powerful words there, KO. I think you've got this down to a science. And indeed, Sami should, of course, have your back because KO said that he's known Sami for 20 years as his best friend and as his brother. Now, I will admit I don't have a lot of knowledge about them fighting in generic high school gyms or anything like that. But what I do know is that KO debuted in NXT on December 11, 2014 at TakeOver R Evolution, and Sami Zayn defeated Neville to win the NXT Championship that very night. And then KO powerbombed him on the apron, and so it was an on-again, off-again relationship between those two. But let's skip all the way to 2021, where Owens didn't believe Sami's conspiracies that WWE was trying to hold him down, so eventually KO had enough and challenged Zayn to a match at WrestleMania, and of course, KO won that match. And those two continued for two more matches, ending in July of 2021, where both won one more match and KO got the final victory. Then, over a year later, they finally met again on opposite sides of the War Games match, where Sami Zayn was now the honorary Uso. And KO, of course, had fought the Bloodline more than anyone else, which is still true today. And even though it was Zayn who was wrong for being a conspiracy theorist in 2021 and for also being a Bloodline member in 2022, Zayn found it in him to help KO at the 23 Royal Rumble and hit Reigns with that steel chair. But of course, even after that incident, KO didn't want to partner with Zayn yet again, but he kept helping him when the Bloodline attacked, until KO finally decided to officially reunite, and they of course went on to main event WrestleMania and win the tag team titles. Then much later in 2023, they were only broken up when Cody Rhodes petitioned Adam Pearce to make a trade for Jey Uso after Jey had quit the WWE due to Roman Reigns and the Bloodline. So of course, there had to be compensation to get Jey over from SmackDown to Raw, so unfortunately, it was Owens who was shipped from Raw over to SmackDown. And at WrestleMania 40, it was KO who met Zayn before his IC title match, that of course he ended up winning, and then Zayn returned that favor the next night before KO's IC title match, which didn't go quite as well. Now obviously, as you can see there, they were still best friends despite not even being on the same show. So I guess we really need to talk about relationships here, and there are 5 of them here, so let's talk about each of these pentagonal relationships. So first we have Sami Zayn and Jey Uso as the first relationship. They are, of course, both still on Raw, and they work together a fair amount. They have an enduring friendship post their Bloodline fallout, and Zayn even saved Jey from the same fate as his brother Jimmy with a chair over his neck at Crown Jewel. And then when Zayn wanted Reigns to apologize to Jey rather than to him, just to get on board with the Bloodline again, Reigns couldn't do it. Nonetheless, Zayn still joined for War Games, mostly due to Jey. And of course, on the SmackDown before the Netflix premiere, Zayn, Jey, and Jimmy all teamed up together in a 6-man tag against the New Bloodline. But what about KO's relationship with Jey? On that same episode on January 3rd, the Usos had just finished speaking to Carmelo Hayes and were walking away when KO just happened to walk past them, and now he told them to watch their backs. So I guess it appears that KO has his eyes on them yet again because, of course, they teamed back up with Roman Reigns, and so I can imagine KO was not particularly pleased with that. Now, based on what he said with Zayn on Monday, he probably at least gets it because the Usos are Reigns' family. But if they keep teaming with Reigns to get him back in power, it might just be a problem. And of course, Reigns got that Ulafala and both of the Usos helped them. But does KO still give them a pass for that in the same way that he is giving one to Sami? Well, perhaps it's one thing to be the tribal chief that really doesn't have a lot to do with KO, but I bet it's a completely different thing if they help him go for the WWE Championship. So that's Jey's relationship with both Sami and Kevin. So let's next talk about Cody Rhodes. First with Zayn, it was Rhodes who proposed a truce between Zayn and Owens in March of 2023 that ultimately got them back together. And it was also Rhodes who inadvertently broke them up by getting Jey on Raw. Now, Sami and Cody have been on opposite brands since Rhodes finished the story since he had to go to SmackDown. But they did have one brief interaction on the Raw after Bad Blood where Zayn wanted to talk about KO and what he did at Bad Blood, but Rhodes just wanted Zayn to focus on his title match against Gunther, which Sami lost anyways. But then they both interfered for Reigns on that Netflix premiere, but not at the same time. So we don't really have much direct interaction between these two, but they do still seem to be on good terms, if nothing else. Now for KO and Rhodes, we know that story. Obviously, Rhodes is the bane of KO's existence and vice versa. So we don't really need to hash this out completely here. I think we know. Of course, it was very hypocritical for the Messy King to team up with Reigns at Bad Blood, and the same for him to help out Reigns again on that Netflix premiere by stopping KO from a package piledriver that would have ended Reigns' attempt to get back on top. So obviously we don't need to say too much about those two. But let's go on to the 5th man in this pentagonal relationship. And so we'll go to Sami Zayn with Roman Reigns, and it was in fact KO on Monday night who said, "I'll admit, when I saw you team with Roman Reigns at Survivor Series, I didn't understand it right away. I was pretty upset." Then he continued by saying, "I realized you and Roman obviously had a lot of history, just like you and I have a lot of history. And Roman did some really terrible things to you that you chose to overlook. Just like I am man enough to admit that I did a lot of terrible things to you in the past that you also chose to overlook. Actually, it's not that you overlooked them, it's you forgave me, just like you forgave Roman." So that pretty much sums it up, but I do want to know that there was one little thing that Zayn wanted out of Reigns to rejoin them, and that was for Roman to apologize to Jey for what he did to his own cousin. But even that very small gesture was just too big for the little puppy, and yet Zayn still decided to join him for War Games because his time with the Bloodline was special. Gosh, that's horrific. I need a minute after that. Okay, but even after that War Games win, he still decided to help Reigns again on that Netflix premiere, even though he had no dog in the fight anymore. And then lastly, there is KO and Reigns. So what Reigns has done to KO is, of course, inexcusable. As we said earlier, no one has fought the Bloodline for longer or more often than KO. And at every step, the Bloodline just physically punished KO and there was no greater injustice than the screw job at the 21 Royal Rumble when KO had Reigns tied to a post and he should have been counted out, but of course the fix was in and Reigns somehow found a way to get the win. And then at the Royal Rumble of 2023, that post-match brutality was too much for even Sami Zayn that he had no choice but to finally say no to Reigns and hit him in the back with that steel chair. So at the end of the day, Sami obviously likes Jey and has no real reason to not like Cody, and I guess he's at least on relatively good terms with Reigns at this point. But then on the other hand, KO is neutral or wary of Jey at the very best, and he obviously very much so hates Cody Rhodes and hates Roman Reigns. But of course, at the end of the day, this is all about Sami Zayn and Kevin Owens, and it's their own friendship that is the real factor here. So just how strong is this bond? So KO said, "You're a good person. That's what you are. And you know what? Seth's right. You do a lot for other people, especially your friends. And you and you're my best friend." And that's right, KO said that he is Sami's best friend and brother. But does Sami still feel the same way? Well, there's no reason why he shouldn't, right? Zayn already had to make a couple tough calls here, and admittedly probably the wrong calls, because ultimately he picked Roman Reigns over Solo Sikoa. And why would anyone do that? I mean, I've told you many times just how terrible of a reason that was. And of course, Reigns was the one who called all the terrible shots that made Zayn eventually turn on Reigns and the Bloodline in the first place, while Sikoa was just following his orders, and so Solo ended up just learning from the worst that there is. Now, of course, Zayn has a friendship with Jey, and that's what won the day, perhaps, to have him choose Roman over Solo. So was that the right call? No, of course not. It was a terrible call. But Zayn goes with his friends, and I guess in this case, Jey was the one that was his friend. So is there any issue now for Sami to go with KO? I mean, he's literally had one meaningful 2-minute interaction with Cody Rhodes since Rhodes finished the story. He's never stopped being KO's best friend despite being on opposite shows. So surely when rubber meets the road, 20 years together has to mean more than the 3 matches that Zayn and Rhodes have had together since Rhodes returned to the WWE. And 2 of those 3 matches were 6-man tags where KO was on their team. And the other one happened to be the 2023 War Games match where there were 3 other guys on their team. So just like Reigns really needed Sami Zayn to save him to take back that Ula Fala, Zayn did so without even needing to be asked. So in this case, KO has already admitted that this is the time that he really needs his best friend and brother, Sami Zayn. So surely Zayn will be ready to go for him if he does need that help. So if Sami has to make a 3-way choice between doing nothing at all, helping Rhodes, or helping his best friend, Kevin Owens, there's only one right answer here, and that is to help his brother, KO, and so as always, KO is right. And if you want to see my grades for that KO and Sami Zayn segment, as well as all the others from Monday Night Raw, be sure to check that out right over here. Because if you don't, just like if Zayn makes the wrong choice and turns his back on his best friend, that would be not okay.